I should have left an hour ago. The thought circles through my mind like smoke from the cigarette someone abandoned in the ashtray 3 stools down. The bar has that hollow feeling now, the kind of quiet that settles over a place when the night has stretched too thin and most people have found their way home or to someone else's bed. The jukebox plays something low and forgettable, a song that exists only to fill the space between silence and the sound of ice melting in abandoned glasses. My whiskey has gone warm. I know this because I've been holding the same glass for 20 minutes, watching the ice cube shrink into nothing, leaving behind only the amber liquid and my reflection staring back from its surface. 3 other people occupy this space with me. A woman in a red coat sits by the window, her phone pressed to her ear as she whispers something urgent or desperate into it. An older man hunches over his beer at the far end of the bar, his shoulders curved like parentheses around his solitude. And behind the counter, Felix moves through his closing routine with the kind of practiced precision that makes everything else in the room feel clumsy by comparison. I watch him work. I have been watching him work for months now, though I would never admit this to anyone, least of all to myself. His sleeves are rolled up past his elbows tonight, revealing forearms that tell stories I do not know but find myself wanting to read. There are scars there, thin white lines across his knuckles that speak of work done with hands instead of computers, of a life lived outside the safety of lecture halls and library stacks. He moves like someone who has learned efficiency through necessity, each gesture deliberate and unhurried. When he wipes down a bar top, the cloth follows the same pattern every time. When he stacks glasses, they align with mathematical precision. I am 22 years old, and I have never been good at wanting things. Desire, for me, has always been a distant concept, something I observed in others, but rarely felt with any real intensity. I want to graduate. I want to find a job that pays enough to cover rent and groceries. These are practical wants, safe wants, the kind that can be written on applications and discussed with parents over holiday dinners. But this thing I feel when I watch Felix pour drinks and laugh at customers' jokes and run his fingers through his dark hair when he thinks no one is looking, this is something different entirely. This is the kind of wanting that keeps me coming back to this dim bar 3 blocks from campus, nursing drinks I cannot afford and pretending to read books I have already finished. The woman by the window gathers her coat and purse, her phone call apparently concluded. She leaves without looking back, and the older man signals for another beer with a gesture so slight it might have been involuntary. Now, there are 3 of us, and the space feels both larger and smaller at once. Felix uncaps the beer and slides it across the scratched wood surface. The man nods his thanks and returns to whatever private conversation he has been having with his reflection in the bottle. Felix glances at me, just for a moment, and I pretend to be absorbed in the amber liquid swirling in my glass. But I feel his attention like heat against my skin, and I wonder if he can see through the careful performance I've been giving for weeks now, the act of casual patronage that barely conceals the truth of why I am here. I should order another drink, or I should leave. These are the only 2 choices that make sense. Instead, I do neither. I sit and listen to the sound of the ice machine cycling on and off, to the distant hum of traffic outside, to the soft percussion of Felix stacking clean glasses on the shelf behind the bar. The neon beer signs cast everything in shades of red and blue, and in this light, the ordinary world takes on the quality of a film still, beautiful, and slightly unreal. 20 minutes later, the older man finishes his beer and shuffles toward the door, leaving behind a crumpled 20 and the lingering smell of cigarettes and aftershave. The door chimes once as it closes behind him, and then Felix and I are alone. This has happened before, though never quite like this. Usually, there's still 1 or 2 other stragglers, people who serve as a buffer between intention and possibility. Tonight, the buffer is gone, and I can feel the weight of Felix's presence across the narrow space like a gravitational pull I am powerless to resist. He continues his closing routine, but I sense a change in his movements, a heightened awareness that mirrors my own. When he reaches for the bottles on the top shelf, his shirt pulls tight across his shoulders. When he bends to retrieve something from beneath the counter, I find myself holding my breath. These are small moments, meaningless in themselves, but they accumulate like interest in an account I never meant to open. I finished the last of my whiskey and set the glass down with more force than necessary. The sound echoes in the quiet space, and Felix looks up from whatever he was doing behind the register. "One more," I say, though my voice comes out rougher than I intended. "Just one more." He does not hesitate. The bottle appears in his hand as if summoned, and he pours with the same steady precision he brings to everything else. The whiskey catches the neon light as it falls, liquid amber transformed into something precious by the simple act of Felix's attention. He slides the glass across the bar, and our fingers brush as I reach for it. The contact lasts less than a second, but it leaves behind a heat that travels up my arm and settles somewhere beneath my ribs. I reach for my wallet, the automatic gesture of someone who has been buying his own drinks since he learned to want things he could not have. But Felix's hand moves faster than mine, and suddenly his fingers are wrapped around my wrist, holding me in place with a touch that is firm but not forceful, possessive but not demanding. "This one's on me," he says, and his voice carries something I have never heard there before, something that makes the ordinary words feel like a secret being shared between us. His thumb rests against my pulse point, and I wonder if he can feel the way my heart has begun to race. If he knows that this simple touch has rewritten every assumption I have made about the nature of our interactions over the past months. The pressure of his grip is steady, anchoring, as if he is afraid I might disappear if he lets go. Or perhaps he is afraid that he might. We look at each other across the narrow expanse of worn wood and spilled beer, and I see something in his eyes that I've been hoping to find there, something that tells me I have not been imagining the weight of his attention or the way conversations between us seem to carry more meaning than their words should allow. The bar around us falls away, and there's only this moment, this touch, this recognition of something that has been building between us like pressure in a closed system, waiting for the right moment to release. The world holds its breath, and so do I. I have never been the kind of person who draws attention. In high school, I was the one who sat in the back corner of the classroom, who ate lunch alone with a book propped against my tray, who could disappear for days without anyone noticing my absence. College has been more of the same. I attend my literature classes and turn in my assignments and nod politely when professors call on me. But I exist in the margins of other people's stories, a footnote in the narrative of campus life. This is not a complaint. I have always preferred the safety of invisibility, the comfort of being overlooked. When you do not take up space, no one expects you to defend it. When you do not ask for attention, no one can withhold it as punishment. I learned these lessons early, the way some children learn to tie their shoes or recite their alphabet. Survival, for me, has always been a matter of making myself small enough to slip through the cracks. But sitting in this bar 3 nights a week for the past 4 months, watching Felix work, I have begun to understand that invisibility has its own weight. The constant effort of disappearing leaves marks, like carrying something heavy for so long that you forget what it feels like to put it down. And Felix, without ever saying so directly, has made me aware of the burden I have been carrying. It started small. The first time I ordered a drink from him, he remembered it the second time I came in. Not unusual for a bartender, perhaps, but when I changed my order the third time, testing him, he served me the new drink without being asked. The fourth time, he had it ready before I sat down. These small acts of attention should not have mattered, but they did. They made me feel seen in a way I had forgotten was possible. The bar itself became a refuge after that. Tucked between a used bookstore and a diner that serves breakfast 24 hours a day, it exists in the kind of in-between space that most people walk past without noticing. The sign outside is small and modest, just the name painted in fading letters on weathered wood. Inside, the lighting is dim enough to hide in, the music quiet enough to think, and the crowd sparse enough that you can go hours without having to make conversation with strangers. I told myself I came here to study, to escape the noise of my roommates' video games and the fluorescent brightness of the library. I would spread my books across one of the small tables near the back wall and nurse a single drink for 2 hours, occasionally glancing up to watch Felix work. He moved through his shift with an economy of motion that fascinated me, every gesture purposeful and precise. When the bar got busy on Friday nights, he never seemed hurried or flustered. He simply worked faster, his hands finding bottles and glasses without conscious thought, his attention dividing seamlessly between multiple customers without ever making anyone feel ignored. But it was the quiet moments that held me. When the crowd thinned and the conversations died down, Felix would lean against the back counter and survey his domain with the satisfaction of someone who has found his place in the world. He would catch my eye sometimes during these interludes, and something would pass between us that felt like recognition, though of what I could never say. Felix is 26, 4 years older than me, though the gap feels wider than that. He carries himself with the settled confidence of someone who has already answered the questions I am still learning how to ask. Where I am uncertain, he is steady. Where I hesitate, he acts. The other bartenders who work the afternoon shifts treat him with a deference that speaks of respect earned rather than demanded. The regular customers know his name, ask about his life outside the bar, leave generous tips that he accepts with genuine gratitude rather than performance. There are stories about him, whispered conversations I have overheard while pretending to read. He used to work construction before he started bartending. He has a motorcycle parked behind the building that he rides to work when the weather is good. Someone saw him at the hospital visiting an older woman who might have been his mother or his grandmother. He lives alone in an apartment above the hardware store on Elm Street. These fragments of information feel precious to me, though I'm not sure why. Perhaps because they suggest a life lived fully, deliberately, in contrast to my own careful existence in the margins. Tonight, with his fingers still wrapped around my wrist and his eyes holding mine across the scarred surface of the bar, I realize that all of those months of watching and wondering have led to this moment. The careful distance I have maintained, the pretense of casual patronage, the fiction that I come here for the atmosphere rather than for him, all of it dissolves under the weight of his attention. His thumb moves against my pulse, a small adjustment that sends heat racing through my veins. I wonder what he sees when he looks at me like this, whether he recognizes the one I have been trying so hard to hide. The thought terrifies and thrills me in equal measure. The possibility that my careful performance has been transparent all along, that Felix has been watching me watch him, waiting for the right moment to close the distance between observation and action. The bar around us feels suspended in time, caught in the amber light of neon signs and the weight of unspoken possibility. Tomorrow, I will have to return to my real life, to classes and assignments, and the careful choreography of being 22 and uncertain about everything. But tonight, in this in-between space with Felix's hand on my wrist and something dangerous building in the space between us, I allow myself to imagine what it might feel like to be seen completely, to step out of the margins and into the center of my own story. His fingers release my wrist slowly, reluctantly, as if he is testing his own resolve. The absence of his touch leaves my skin burning, a phantom heat that spreads up my arm and settles in my chest like a second heartbeat. I flex my fingers around the glass he has poured for me, using the cool surface as an anchor to the present moment, to the reality of what has just passed between us. Felix steps back from the bar, but not far. He busies himself with unnecessary tasks, wiping down surfaces that are already clean, adjusting bottles that were already perfectly aligned. But I can feel his attention on me like a physical presence, can sense the way he measures my reactions to his retreat. The air between us hums with the kind of tension that makes ordinary sounds seem amplified. The ice machine cycles on with a mechanical wheeze. A car passes outside, its headlights sweeping across the window and casting moving shadows on the wall. The neon beer sign flickers twice before settling back into its steady red glow. "You should head out soon," he says, though his voice carries none of the authority his words suggest. Instead, there is something almost questioning in it, as if he is offering me an exit rather than demanding I take one. He does not look at me as he speaks, focusing instead on the arrangement of bottles behind the bar, but I catch the way his shoulders tense as he waits for my response. I take a sip of the whiskey he has given me, letting the liquid burn away some of the uncertainty that threatens to overwhelm my ability to think clearly. The smart thing would be to finish this drink quickly and leave, to return to my apartment and my books and the safety of routine. Tomorrow, I could pretend this moment never happened, could go back to being the invisible customer who watches from a distance and never asks for more than what is offered freely. This is what the rational part of my mind counsels. The voice that has kept me safe for 22 years by teaching me to avoid situations where the outcome cannot be predicted or controlled. But sitting here in the amber light of the bar, with the taste of good whiskey on my tongue and the memory of Felix's touch still singing in my blood, rationality feels like a luxury I can no longer afford. For months, I have been content to exist in the margins of this space, to take whatever small attentions Felix offered and hoard them like secrets. Tonight, the careful equilibrium we have maintained feels insufficient, like a dam that has been holding back too much pressure for too long. I pretend to consider his suggestion, tilting the glass in my hand and watching the whiskey catch the light. The performance gives me time to study his profile as he works, to note the way his jaw tightens when I do not immediately respond. There is something different about him tonight, a restlessness that mirrors my own. The easy confidence he usually wears like armor has developed hairline cracks, and through those cracks, I glimpse something raw and uncertain that makes him seem more human, more reachable. Or I could stay until you lock up. The words leave his mouth so quietly that for a moment I think I might have imagined them. But when he turns to face me, his eyes hold mine with an intensity that makes my breath catch in my throat. This is not the casual suggestion of a bartender to a regular customer. This is an invitation into something uncharted, something that exists beyond the safe boundaries of our previous interactions. He does not repeat himself or elaborate on what staying might mean. Instead, he waits, giving me space to make a choice that we both understand will change everything between us. The silence stretches, heavy with possibility, and I realize that this is the moment I have been moving toward since the first night I walked into this bar and saw him laugh at something a customer said, saw the way his whole face transformed when he smiled. I nod, a small movement that feels enormous in its implications. Felix's shoulders relax almost imperceptibly, as if he's been holding his breath without realizing it. He returns to his closing routine, but there's a new quality to his movements now, a heightened awareness that mirrors my own. Every gesture feels deliberate, ritualistic, as if he is preparing sacred ground rather than simply cleaning up after another night's work. I watch him turn chairs onto tables, their legs pointing toward the ceiling like supplicant arms. I watch him count the register and lock the money in a small safe behind the bar. I watch him wipe down surfaces and arrange bottles and dim the lights one by one until the bar takes on the intimate quality of a confessional, lit only by the neon signs and the streetlight filtering through the front window. With each completed task, the space between us becomes more charged, more deliberate. We are no longer bartender and customer sharing the same room by coincidence. We are two people who have chosen to be here together, who have acknowledged something that has been building between us for months and decided to see where it leads. The transformation is subtle but complete, like the moment when twilight gives way to true darkness and the world reveals its hidden possibilities. When Felix finally locks the register and hangs his bar towel on its designated hook, the ordinary sounds of closing feel like the final notes of a song I have been listening to all my life without truly hearing. Tonight, I am finally ready to learn what comes after the music ends. The sound of the lock turning echoes in the empty bar like a period at the end of a sentence, final and irreversible. Felix tests the door handle once, ensuring it will not open from the outside, and then turns back to face the space we now share alone. The neon beer signs cast everything in shifting colors, red fading to blue fading to amber, transforming the familiar into something dreamlike and strange. I remain on my bar stool, though the pretense of being a customer has evaporated with the turning of the lock. Felix moves differently now, no longer performing the role of bartender for an audience of one. His steps are quieter, more deliberate, as if he is navigating not just the physical space of the bar, but some invisible boundary that exists between what we were to each other an hour ago and what we might become now. He does not return to his position behind the bar. Instead, he takes the stool beside mine, close enough that I can smell the faint trace of his cologne mixed with the clean scent of soap and something else, something distinctly him that I have noticed before but never allowed myself to catalog so carefully. The proximity changes everything. Where before there was the safe distance of counter and professional obligation, now there's only the space between two people who have chosen to be here together, breathing the same recycled air and sharing the same uncertainty. We sit in silence for a long moment, both of us adjusting to this new configuration, to the strange intimacy of being alone in a space that is usually filled with voices and laughter and the constant motion of commerce. Without customers to serve and drinks to pour, Felix seems smaller somehow, more human, though no less compelling for the transformation. If anything, his stillness draws me more than his professional competence ever did. He asks about my classes first, a safe topic that gives us both time to acclimate to this new proximity. I tell him about my literature courses, about the paper I am writing on contemporary poets whose names he does not recognize, but whose work he asks me to describe anyway. His attention is complete, focused, as if my words contain secrets he needs to understand. When I mention that I sometimes write poetry myself, he turns his body toward mine, his knee brushing against my thigh in a contact so brief it might have been accidental. "Tell me about it," he says, and something in his voice makes the simple request feel like an invitation to bare my soul. I find myself talking about things I've never shared with anyone, about the way words arrange themselves in my mind during long walks across campus, about the notebooks I fill with fragments of observation and overheard conversation, about the poems I write and immediately tear up because they feel too raw, too revealing to exist in the world. Felix listens without judgment, without the patronizing encouragement I have learned to expect when I mention my writing to other people. Instead, he asks questions that demonstrate he understands the difference between writing as hobby and writing as necessity, as the only way to make sense of the chaos of feeling and experience. When the conversation turns to him, I learn things that surprise me. Before the bar, he worked construction, spending his days building houses for families he would never meet. The work was good, he says, honest and necessary, but it left him feeling disconnected from the people his labor served. Bartending gives him something different, a chance to be present for the small celebrations and quiet sorrows that mark the passage of ordinary lives. He likes the ritual of it, the alchemy of transforming simple ingredients into something that can ease loneliness or mark joy or simply help someone sleep better at night. His hands, as he talks, move in small gestures that emphasize his words, and I find myself watching the play of light across his knuckles, the way his fingers curl when he pauses to think. These are working hands, scarred and calloused in ways that speak of labor more demanding than pulling pints and mixing cocktails. When he mentions the motorcycle he rides to work, I picture him navigating the early morning streets of the city, helmet tucked under one arm, the leather jacket that hangs by the door transforming him from bartender to something more dangerous, more free. The space between us seems to contract as we talk, though neither of us moves consciously closer. It is as if the shared intimacy of conversation creates its own gravity, drawing us together by degrees too small to measure, but impossible to resist. When Felix shifts on his stool, his shoulder brushes mine. When I gesture to emphasize a point, my fingers nearly graze his arm. These small touches accumulate like evidence of something neither of us is quite ready to name. The neon signs cycle through their programmed sequence, bathing us in colors that make everything feel suspended between reality and dream. Outside, the city continues its late-night rhythm, but inside this locked space, time moves differently, measured not by clocks but by the gradual erosion of the careful distance we have maintained for months. We are learning each other's contours through conversation, mapping the territories of interest and experience that draw us together despite all the reasons we should maintain the safe boundaries of bartender and customer, older and younger, certain and uncertain. When Felix asks what I plan to do after graduation, his voice carries a weight that suggests the answer matters to him in ways that extend beyond polite curiosity. The question hangs between us like a bridge we have not yet decided whether to cross. The question about graduation hangs between us, heavier than it should be. I find myself fumbling for an answer that will not reveal how uncertain I am about everything beyond these walls, beyond this moment. I mentioned graduate school, maybe, or teaching, the kind of vague aspirations that satisfy professors and parents but feel hollow when spoken aloud in the amber light of a locked bar. Felix nods, but I can see something shift in his expression, a subtle withdrawal that makes me realize how my uncertainty must sound to someone who has found his place in the world through construction work and late-night conversations with strangers. The silence that follows feels different from the comfortable quiet we have been sharing. This one carries weight, the accumulated pressure of all the things we are not saying to each other. I take a sip of whiskey, hoping the burn will give me courage or at least clarity, but instead it only makes me more aware of the space between what I want and what I am brave enough to ask for. Why me? The words escape before I can stop them, raw and unguarded in a way that makes me want to take them back immediately. But they hang in the air between us, impossible to recall, and I watch Felix's face change as he processes what I have revealed with that simple question. Not just curiosity about his interest, but the deeper vulnerability of someone who has never understood why anyone would choose him from a crowd, why anyone would see something worth pursuing in his careful invisibility. Felix does not answer immediately. Instead, he sets down his own glass and turns to face me fully, his body angled toward mine in a way that makes the space between our knees disappear entirely. His eyes search my face as if he is looking for something specific, some confirmation or denial that will help him calibrate his response. His hand comes down lightly on my wrist again, finding the exact spot he claimed earlier, his thumbs settling against my pulse point with the familiarity of a gesture repeated many times in imagination, if not in reality. The contact sends heat racing through my bloodstream, but this time I do not try to hide my reaction. This time, I let him feel the way my heart rate accelerates under his touch. Let him read the evidence of what his proximity does to me. Because you don't look at me like everyone else does, he says, and his voice carries a quiet intensity that makes every word feel deliberate, chosen with care. And I can't stop looking back. The admission hits me like a physical blow, not because it is unexpected, but because it confirms something I have been hoping for and fearing in equal measure. For months, I have told myself that the attention I pay to Felix is one-sided, that my careful observation of his movements and expressions is the pathetic fascination of someone who has confused proximity with intimacy. But his words suggest a different story, one in which he has been as aware of me as I have been of him, in which the small kindnesses and moments of recognition I have treasured were not accidents but choices. His thumb moves against my pulse, a small circular motion that seems to anchor us both to this moment, to the reality of what is being acknowledged between us. I want to ask what he sees when he looks at me, how I appear different from the other customers who occupy these stools and order these drinks. But the question feels too large, too dangerous, as if the answer might reveal more than I am prepared to handle. Instead, I study his face in the shifting neon light, noting details I have observed from a distance, but never allowed myself to catalog so closely. The small scar above his left eyebrow that catches the light when he turns his head. The way his dark hair falls across his forehead, slightly longer than it should be for someone his age, giving him an unexpectedly boyish quality that contrasts with the authority he carries behind the bar. The fullness of his mouth, which I have watched form words and shape smiles for months without admitting how much I wanted to know what it would feel like against my own. You've been watching me, he continues, and there is no accusation in his voice, only a statement of fact delivered with something that might be gratitude. Not like the others who see what they need or what they want. You see me. The distinction he draws feels crucial, though I am not entirely sure I understand it. But as he speaks, I begin to recognize something in his expression that mirrors my own experience of invisibility, the way people can look directly at you and still manage not to see you at all. Perhaps what I have interpreted as confidence is actually its own form of performance, a way of moving through the world that protects some essential part of himself from scrutiny. The revelation changes something between us, creates a kind of equilibrium where before there was only my wanting and his unknowable response to it. Now we are two people who have admitted to seeing each other, really seeing in a world that seems designed to encourage the opposite. The acknowledgement feels dangerous and necessary, like stepping off solid ground into water too deep to stand in, but too warm to want to leave. His hand tightens slightly on my wrist, and I realize that we have crossed some invisible threshold, that whatever happens next will happen, because we have both chosen it, both admitted to wanting something that cannot be taken back or undone. The silence that follows his admission feels charged with electricity, as if the air itself has become conductive to the current running between us. His hand remains on my wrist, thumb pressed against my pulse, and I wonder if he can feel the way my heartbeat has become erratic, syncopated with the weight of everything that has been acknowledged between us. The neon signs continue their lazy cycle of color, but the light feels different now, more intimate, as if we exist inside a kaleidoscope that transforms reality into something both more beautiful and more fragile. I should say something in response to his revelation, should offer some reciprocal acknowledgement of what this means, but words feel inadequate to the moment. Instead, I find myself leaning forward slightly, drawn by a gravity I no longer have the strength or desire to resist. The movement is small, barely perceptible, but Felix notices immediately. His eyes drop to my mouth and then return to meet my gaze, a question forming in the space between intention and action. The bar around us feels suspended in time, caught in the amber light of revelation and possibility. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wails through the empty streets, but the sound seems to come from another world entirely, one that exists beyond the boundaries of this locked room and this moment of perfect tension. My breath catches in my throat as Felix shifts on a stool, angling his body closer to mine, his free hand coming up to rest lightly on my knee. The contact sends heat shooting through my nervous system, a reminder of how long I have been starving for touch, for the simple acknowledgement of my physical presence in the world. Felix's palm is warm through the fabric of my jeans, his fingers spread wide, as if he is trying to memorize the shape of me through layers of cloth and careful distance. The gesture is tender and possessive at once, a claiming that feels both inevitable and shocking in its directness. My throat has gone dry, but I managed to speak, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. I don't know how to do this, I tell him, and the admission carries more weight than the words themselves suggest. I'm not just talking about the mechanics of desire or the choreography of intimacy. I am confessing to a deeper uncertainty, the kind that comes from having lived most of my life as an observer rather than a participant, from having wanted things I convinced myself I could never have. Felix's grip on my wrist tightens almost imperceptibly, an anchor in the storm of my own vulnerability. I know, he says, and there is something in his voice that suggests he understands not just my inexperience, but the careful isolation that has created it. His thumb traces a small circle against my pulse point, a gesture so gentle it makes my chest ache with the sweetness of it. We don't have to know how. The permission he offers feels like absolution, though for what sin I cannot say. Perhaps for wanting something so desperately while being too afraid to ask for it. Perhaps for allowing myself to imagine possibilities that seem too large for someone like me to contain. His words create space for uncertainty, for the kind of fumbling honesty that comes when desire finally overwhelms the need to appear competent or controlled. He leans closer, close enough that I can feel the warmth of his breath against my cheek, can smell the faint trace of whiskey on his lips. The proximity makes my head spin, a dizziness that has nothing to do with alcohol and everything to do with the sudden collapse of the distance I've been using to protect myself from the full intensity of what I feel for him. Tell me to stop, he whispers, and the words carry both command and plea, both invitation and escape route. His lips are so close to mine now that when he speaks, They brush against my mouth like a kiss that is not quite committed to being itself. The contact is electric, devastating in its restraint, and I realize that this is the moment everything has been building toward, the fulcrum on which the entire architecture of our careful dance will tip either toward completion or collapse. I can feel the rapid rise and fall of my own chest, can hear the thunderous sound of my heartbeat in my ears, can taste the copper tang of adrenaline on my tongue. Every nerve in my body is alive, hyper-aware of Felix's proximity, of the heat radiating from his skin, of the way his fingers have tightened on my knee, as if he is afraid I might disappear if he relaxes his grip. The rational part of my mind catalogs all the reasons I should ask him to stop, should retreat to the safety of distance and pretense. But that voice feels small and distant now, overwhelmed by the larger truth of what I want, what I've been wanting for months without allowing myself to name it fully. I breathe against his mouth, the two words containing multitudes. I don't ask him to stop. Instead, I close the final millimeter of space between us, my lips finding his in a kiss that starts as question and becomes answer, that transforms months of careful watching into something immediate and undeniable. The contact is everything I imagined and nothing like I expected, soft and urgent at once, tasting of whiskey and possibility and the salt tang of tears I did not realize had started to fall. The kiss breaks gently, not from urgency cooled, but from a need to breathe, to process what has just shifted between us with the simple meeting of mouths. Felix does not pull away entirely. Instead, he rests his forehead against mine, his breath warm against my lips, his hand still anchored on my wrist, as if he needs the connection to believe this moment is real. The taste of him lingers on my tongue, whiskey and something sweeter, something indefinably him that I know I will carry with me long after this night ends. My eyes remain closed, afraid that opening them will break whatever spell has transformed this ordinary bar into a place where impossible things become possible. But even in darkness, I am hyper-aware of everything. The slight tremor in Felix's fingers where they rest against my pulse, the sound of his breathing slowly returning to normal, the way the neon signs continue their patient cycle of color behind my eyelids, painting the world in shades of red and blue and amber. When I finally open my eyes, Felix is watching me with an expression I have never seen before, something raw and unguarded that makes him look younger, more vulnerable. The careful control he wears like armor has fallen away entirely, leaving behind something honest and immediate that takes my breath away all over again. His thumb traces the line of my jaw, a touch so gentle it feels like reverence, like he is afraid I might disappear if he applies too much pressure. "We should talk about this," he says finally, though his voice carries none of the regret I half expected to hear. Instead, there is something that might be wonder, as if he is as surprised as I am by the intensity of what has passed between us. His hand moves from my wrist to cover my own where it rests on the bar, fingers interlacing with a naturalness that suggests this is how our hands were always meant to fit together. "Tomorrow," I hear myself saying, though I'm not sure where the word comes from. Tonight feels too precious to dissect, too fragile to survive the weight of analysis. Tomorrow we can figure out what this means, what happens next, how two people navigate the space between want and reality. But tonight, I want to exist in the amber glow of neon signs and shared breath, in the simple miracle of being seen and chosen by someone I thought existed beyond my reach. Felix nods, understanding passing between us without need for explanation. He knows, as I do, that some moments are too delicate for planning, too perfect to survive the intrusion of practical questions. There will be time later for discussions about what this changes between us, about how we move forward from bartender and customer to something else entirely. But not now, not while the kiss is still fresh on our lips and the bar feels like a cathedral built for two. He stands slowly, reluctantly, but does not release my hand. Instead, he helps me down from the bar stool, steadying me when my legs prove less reliable than expected. The whiskey, the emotional intensity, The complete reorganization of everything I thought I knew about my own capacity for connection, all of it has left me feeling unmoored in the best possible way. The bar looks different now, transformed by what has happened here. The same tables and chairs, the same scarred wooden counter, the same neon signs casting their eternal glow, but all of it charged with new meaning. This is no longer just the place where I came to watch Felix work. This is the place where we found each other, where months of careful observation finally gave way to recognition and choice, and the kind of kiss that rewrites the past, even as it creates the future. Felix moves through his final closing rituals with the same precision as always, but I can see the way his movements have softened, how his attention keeps drifting back to where I stand near the door, waiting. When he dims the last light and checks the register one final time, the gesture feels ceremonial, like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. He joins me by the door, keys in hand, but makes no move to unlock it immediately. Instead, he reaches for me again, his palms settling against my cheek with the familiarity of a gesture we have practiced in some other lifetime. The contact is warm, grounding, a promise that what has happened between us will survive the transition from this protected space to the larger world beyond these walls. Outside, the city continues its late-night rhythm, unaware that anything has changed. But inside this bar, in the amber light of neon signs and the quiet aftermath of transformation, two empty glasses sit abandoned on the counter like evidence of an ordinary evening that became something extraordinary. The air still holds the weight of shared breath and whispered confessions, of a question asked and answered with the simple refusal to ask someone to stop. When Felix finally turns the key and we step out into the cool night air, his hand finds mine with the inevitability of rivers finding the sea. The touch is no longer electric with newness, but warm with promise, steady with the kind of certainty that comes only after choosing and being chosen in return. Tomorrow will bring questions and complications and the challenge of integrating this night into the larger story of our lives. But tonight, walking through empty streets with Felix's fingers interlaced with mine, I understand for the first time what it means to step out of the margins and into the center of my own story.